Imagine a school district that serves over 20,000 students, and it's a completely segregated school district. Now, imagine if you're the parent that is trying to advocate for inclusive education when the whole school district is segregated. Well, District 75 in New York City is the most segregated school district in the country. And we are lucky because we are going to be hearing about some specific stories from families. And today we are privileged because we have the filmmakers and parents of Emilio. We have Olivier and Hilda Bernier. And they are going to be sharing their story of inclusive education and what that journey was like. And we also have a wonderful, nationally recognized advocate for inclusive education who's currently a Ph.D. student at Syracuse University, Sara Jo. And Sara Jo, tell us how you say your last name. Is it Soldovieri?
Soldovieri, yep. But that's our Joe.
I know. It's easier to say Sara Jo, right? And so I am excited because, as you know, inclusive education is a value that I hold dearly, that we talk about frequently on our live show. And so today, if you haven't joined us before, I am Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent of an adult son with Down syndrome, a retired special ed and general ed teacher, and full-time advocate for families. So Olivier, Hilda, Sara Jo, I'm looking forward to a great conversation. I want to remind our viewers that if you're watching live or on the replay, type in your questions and we will circle back and get those answered. So Olivier, if you could start us out by taking us back to that day when you were first envisioning doing a film documentary about inclusive education and what that first vision for you was.
Sure. Well, when my son was born, we found out in the delivery room that he would have Down syndrome. And at that moment, I felt completely unprepared. At that time, I really didn't even understand what Down syndrome was fully. And I had never met anyone with Down syndrome. So from that point, pretty quickly knew that I had to use my tools as a filmmaker to try to understand how the world could be better for someone with Down syndrome. Going back a little bit, I had never met anyone with Down syndrome. And I largely think that's because I went to a segregated school where they were hidden from us. And I went to a large school. So statistically speaking, there had to be people with intellectual disabilities in the school. Yet we never even had lunch with them or went to gym with them. So I quickly started seeing the classroom, as a segregated classroom, as an issue and kind of the reason why I was unprepared for my own son. So that's kind of where the idea started, that I wanted to make some kind of movie that could have a positive impact for Emilio, and that turned into a film about inclusive education.
Great. And where along the way, I think it was maybe from when Emilia was transitioning from early intervention to preschool, that you saw kind of the necessity to be more of an outspoken advocate for your kids. And so Hilda, I know you are a special ed teacher and have done a lot of work in schools. And then here you are, a parent, having to advocate for your son. So can you share a little bit about what that was like for you?
So, yeah, it was a completely different experience to be on the parent side. Because as an educator, I was always mapping and planning for the student, coordinating with the providers, collecting data, trying to make sure that everything stayed in compliance, which is very important, for the administrators and everybody. When I was on the other side, I realized that the parent usually it's a very passive receiver of all these information. So for me, it was an eye-opening experience and a shocking experience at the same time, because I was getting all this information that was taken in a limited amount of time. And there were decisions that were being made based on that particular assessment of these particular providers. So, it was difficult to digest the idea that my son was being boxed into something at such an early age, just by some brief assessments made by strangers. It was
Right. Oh, I know. And it's, like you said, as a teacher, you're trained to, do this objective data collecting, get your reports together and all of this. And then I know when I, went to my son's first IEP, that you kind of don't expect, I don't know, maybe that emotional rush of, we are talking about my little kid here. And especially when the conversation turns into more of, a difference of opinion as far as what's going to be the most appropriate, right, for Emilio. So right away, did you get resistance from school staff about even considering an inclusive, placement for Emilio?
Well, we were. It almost felt like a sales pitch. They were trying to sell us this idea that the special class was the best choice for him because he wasn't speaking much. So it was more of a thing where they presented one choice, and he was not being even taken into consideration to go in the least restrictive environment on the first place. And that was it felt unfair, and it felt heartbreaking, because he was, at the moment we were having these conversations, he wasn't even 3 years old. He was assessed when he was 2, and he was going into a program for 3-year-olds.
And we were both pretty surprised, right? I mean, we had already spoken with Sara Jo previously, and we're like, oh, we don't need to bring an advocate to the meeting.
Right.
We'll be okay.
Yes.
And that turned out to be completely wrong.
I know. So how were you able to connect with Sara Jo?
Well, I think it was a number of ways actually that we found each other. There's someone in the film named Kim, and Kim had talked about Sara Jo, and then Sara Jo saw that we were making a film about inclusive education. She reached out to Hilda, I believe. So we kind of got connected that way, and we spoke to her. And for me, it was just like trying to understand what an IEP meeting is, because I was going in completely blind. Even though Hilda tried to explain it to me, it was kind of going over my head. But Sara Jo was consulted with us before the meeting, and Hilda and I were both still of the mindset that this is going to go really well. They're going to see all that Emilio's able to do, and they're going to see how well behaved he is and how much he loves to learn. They're going to see that, and then they're going to recommend at least an integrated setting. So that's how we went into the meeting, and it was pretty shocking when that didn't happen.
Oh, I bet. And Sara Jo, I know when you worked with the National Down Syndrome Society, you were doing lots of advocacy work there. So what are some of the first things that you tell parents when they're wondering how they can advocate for inclusive ed?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. The first thing I always say to parents is inclusive ed is 100% appropriate and 100% what you should be advocating for. And I always like to start with that premise. I like folks to really have a good understanding of what the law says, because honestly, our schools don't do a great job of knowing what the law is. Understanding when we say least restrictive environment, it's not different from student A to student B to student C. It is the general education classroom. That is the only place where non-disabled peers are. Starting there, starting with a vision statement of where do you see your student in 15 years? Because while it may seem, putting the cart before the horse at 3 years old to be thinking about college and thinking about marriage and thinking about all those things, we're setting the groundwork for that at 2 years old, 3 years old. And the only way to get an inclusive life is through inclusion from early on.
Oh, exactly. And when I was emailing Hilda, I was saying it was kind of ironic, some of the similarities, because when our son Dylan was 3, we had disagreement. We wanted him to go to a community preschool. The district wanted him to go to the special ed preschool. And we wound up filing for due process when he was 3. And luckily, we're able to get agreement at mediation that community preschool would be now an option for parents in our district. But what I've noticed too is it still just seems like so many individual parents having to do that advocating, and we still don't see systemic change. And so Olivier and Hilda, what are your hopes? What are your visions for the life that Emilio will have?
Yeah, well, I think I want Emilio to be part of the fabric of society. And I think when you look at schools, what you're doing is you're creating a little miniature mirror of what you want that society to be like. So you want that classroom to be diverse. You want to have a lot of ways of thinking. You want to have different socioeconomic backgrounds in the classroom. And that's what creates a full society, an empathetic society, and a society that has vibrant discussions. And although can disagree, we understand each other's viewpoints or understand where each other is coming from. And, for me personally, I just felt it in my gut that there's no reason why my son should be swept under the carpet and hidden away somewhere. So, it's starting from that premise, it became, well, how do we make this work versus, is it possible?
Right. Right. And so I know different families have asked if you would feel comfortable giving an update on how Emilio is doing now and what school looks like for him.
Sure. Do you want to take that?
Sure. So at the moment, Emilio is participating on an inclusive pre-K classroom, and he was able to get back on the classroom in April. So we have seen ever since he's back how great is the environment for him. He's learning so much, and he's trying to speak, and he is learning about manners, and there is a very cute story that I am going to slide in because it melted my heart. And it just happened yesterday. He was in doing some class activity, and there was this little girl that's on his class. And when he saw that she was approaching the table, he got up, he stopped what he was doing, he got up his chair, and he went to get a chair for her. And Farmers fit. So, like those are things that, that's learned behavior. And, it was uh, really amazing to hear that, that he is picking up so many great things from his classmates and his teachers. I am very, very happy that he has this opportunity right now, and I definitely look forward to keep it like that, because the benefits that I am seeing from him being in this environment are incredible, are beautiful. I do want him to keep progressing in that way, moving forward to elementary school and middle school and even high school. And like, as a teacher, I saw how great it was to be in an inclusive environment, and how detrimental was to not be in integrated or inclusive settings. So I definitely look forward to keep moving him along with everybody.
Right.
It's what we want, and that's what everybody should think about. It's like how we can teach our children to learn from each other, to coexist with each other. How can they just help each other? It's very important that these conversations keep happening, and that we can keep helping them along the way.
Oh, I know. And those friendships that they form with, their classmates, it's just so heartwarming, and the benefits for the other kids in the class, right? So I think sometimes, when teachers hear they're going to have a student that's on an IEP in their class, and they might be kind of fearful, they don't have the skills, they don't know what to do. And also, I think sometimes teachers feel like this is going to be extra work for me. And I think if more people would understand that having this child in your classroom is actually going to make you a better teacher, it's going to help all the kids in the class. And so it's not just extra effort because of this one student. It's a different kind of effort, so we can really have all of our kids, have that sense of belonging. And I know, Sara Jo, I'm sure you've seen so many examples of kids just shining, when they are included in general ed classes.
Absolutely. I always say that Emilio, or any one of my kiddos, as I call them, who are fully included and are thriving, they are not the exception. They are the rule. There is not one student that does not belong in an inclusive placement with proper supports. And I love, Charmaine, what you say about it's not necessarily more effort, it's a different kind of effort. And when I talk to educators who are still in the classroom, my colleagues, my friends, even the future educators that I have really the privilege of teaching here at SU, is yes, it makes you look at education a vastly different way, but I'm now benefiting all students. I am helping the student who is 3 grade levels above. I'm helping students who are, way behind. I remember when I taught 2nd grade and we wrote a persuasive essay, and I had everything from, students putting together pictures with pecs on why kittens were the best animal, to a 2nd grader saying why we should get rid of the Electoral College. So there was a wide range. And because I was an inclusive educator, I'm able to have both ends of a spectrum, although I hate this dichotomy that exists. But we're able to meet the needs of all students.
Oh, exactly. And I know Olivier, other parents have been asking too, because I wanted to make sure that we talk about the film Forget Me Not. I'm not sure I've used the title yet. And also just, I know it was released in May. People were able to watch it. It was at the Human Rights Watch Film Festival in New York. But if other people are interested, how are they going to be able to see your documentary, Forget Me Not?
Yeah, so we were the opening night film of the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, and that was quite an honor, and they did such a good job to get the word out about the film. And normally that film festival would be happening in New York at Lincoln Center, and because this year everything's virtual, people around the country were able to see the film, which was super cool.
Right.
So beyond that, what we're doing is a couple festivals that we'll be announcing shortly. And hopefully sometime September, October, we'll be releasing the film to the general public, where people will be able to stream it and rent it. So, the idea for us is to get as many people to see the film as possible. And then our grantor, who gave us the grant for the film, they're also going to be making the film available. That's Video Camp, and they're going to be making the film available for organizations that want to do screenings of the film.
See, that would be so great. And I want to show people your website. So you can go to forgetmenotdocumentary.com, and there'll be new announcements there when the film is, further released. So that's great. And also you have some great resources on your website. So I would encourage families and educators to go there and look at some of those resources. And I wanted to say hi because we have lots of wonderful people with us today. So I wanted to make sure I welcomed people. I know we have, it's like a very long list of our friends. Lisa's from Wisconsin, and she has the Facebook group Educational Strategies for Children with Down Syndrome. So that's a great Facebook group. She says, thanks for advocating and sharing your story. It's so important for families to hear what it takes. And Kristen is a parent trailblazer, and she is on the road, but she's listening in. And Maggie, we have from Pennsylvania. She says, I'm in a suburb of Philadelphia, love the film, and very excited to hear from Olivier, Hilda, and Sara Jo. She said, I also used to live in New York City and moved to Pennsylvania when my daughter with Down syndrome was 2, because I heard of how difficult it was to advocate for inclusion in New York City. And Sara Jo, do you want to maybe, highlight a little bit more why New York City and District 75 is such a unique situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So New York City in particular, well, I will say New York State in particular is a difficult one to advocate within, because the ways in which the state has interpreted IDEA really allows for segregation, although I would argue IDEA allows for segregation, which is a whole nother conversation. But, when we have outlined things like 1211, 811, 611, it gives the fodder to schools to say, well, I'm allowed to do this. Now,
and excuse me, because I think New York State might be the only one that has this ratio. So do you want to explain the student-teacher ratio they use?
Yes. So 1211 would be 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 paraprofessional. And these are often used for, this is a 1211 student, this is a 611 student, this is a 1212 student. Now, where the state misses it is that those are actually ratios. So I can be, a 611 student and still be fully included with my non-disabled peers, but what they become are programs as opposed to supports. Now, as those of you who got to see the film, see that New York City has, born out of the institutional era, built these separate segregated schools for students who they deem need that specialized, and I use specialized in quotes because there's nothing special about segregation. And It is so difficult to battle for a few reasons. One is it is so ingrained in their system as they don't know how to include students with more complex disabilities. And two is you essentially have a blank check to work with. Now, districts will say all the time, will just take us to due process. And taking a small district in Iowa to due process versus New York City, which still has lawsuits from the 70s open,
Oh,
it is nearly impossible. And we look at equity, right? Who are the families who are able to fight? Who are the families who are able to take time off work to get an advocate? There's a real unequalness that's happened. It's not just a disability issue. It really is a civil rights issue. New York City is the most racially segregated, socioeconomically segregated, and disability segregated. And they have these entrenched systems. I had a professor at SU once who said, if you build it, you will fill it, right? So you have a special place to go to. You're going to find students that have to go there. By even having, this place to go says that there are some students who need that, which is not correct. But the hardest part, in my opinion, about advocating in a place like New York City is essentially the blank check that school districts have to work with. I mean, you see it in the film. They say, take us to due process. As if that is just something that everybody has really the privilege to do.
Right. And that's the thing, as an advocate, that is always so hard for me, is to think of all the other parents that don't have somebody helping, guiding them through the process. And it is so much about privilege, and the rate of change that can happen, the more privileged you are, the more knowledgeable you are. But also, I think, Hilda, when we look at how you're a special education teacher, and yet it's still a challenge for us who know education and how the system works and doesn't work. It's still such a challenge for us. And I think of the parents that hear the school district saying, this would be better for your child. There's a smaller class. The teachers are trained. And parents are like, I don't know. I guess you're right. I mean, I remember going to the cardiologist with Dylan, and he was making some drastic predictions. And it was like, I don't know. You're the cardiologist. It's like, how do we put our faith and trust in people when we are so unsure? And so, Hilda and Olivier, if you have other comments about what that is like as far as, the inequities as far as families being able to fight and advocate for their kids.
So in my experience, I worked in schools that had very high populations of students with disabilities and minorities. And, you have parents that are working 2-3 jobs, caretakers, kids in foster homes, that require services that need a lot of help from people like us that can actually give them the right advice. But sometimes these caretakers don't have the time to get to that, and that's when we need to think about how we, as part of the educational system, need to start reallocating funds and money to fix these problems, because not everybody has the luxury to find an advocate, and we need to teach them that they are stakeholders, that their voice matters, and that and we need to do our part and show them what their options are, not give them a prescription that says, okay, so this is what I think your child should be doing, and this is where we think he should go, because there are options and there are ways to make things happen, but there has to be a change in the way that we work around these things.
I was extremely lucky to have a grant and to be able to spend a lot of time and basically merge my career and my family life for a couple of years and to learn about inclusive education. But, had I gone to that meeting without all the background and all the help from Sara Jo and all the help from the other people I spoke to in making the film, I might have been convinced that a segregated setting was the right setting for Emilio. And even though in my gut I knew it was wrong, I might have been convinced because you see the administrator and you see all these experts and they're telling you that's the right thing, and it's not.
Oh, I know. And it was really powerful in the film when you had the scenes from the institution that you visited. So can you share that part, Olivier?
Sure. When we set out to make the film, institutions hadn't even crossed my mind. And then I came across the Willowbrook institutional footage, and I started to realize that this wasn't that long ago, that if Emilio had been born at the hospital, they would have told us that Emilio would be a burden to us and that we should place him in an institution. And when I think about that, I think it's absolutely crazy. I think that's just the most insane thing, that they would convince you at this very vulnerable moment that you shouldn't be taking care of your child. And, when I started to kind of examine that thinking, I realized that there was a big paradigm shift that happened at some point when we saw those institutions exposed. And what I started to think is that, well, maybe with this film, if people can see inclusion working and see the positive impact that inclusion can have, maybe there can be a second paradigm shift where we can go from segregated settings in school, which are basically, was the next step after the institutions. And maybe now we can look at inclusion as the next step forward.
Oh, I agree. And I remember when I was in college, we visited a state institution. And then, fast forward decades later when our son Dylan was born, and it was like, Dylan is not any different than those kids I saw in that state institution when I was in college. But look at the rich opportunities that he has, because we have made some evolution here with how we look at human rights, right? But yeah, so I was telling Sara Jo, I've always had this dream that I would work myself out of a job. There would not be a need for special ed advocates. We would not have to have shows about inclusive education. It would be part of our new thread of our society. And now I've decided I'm just passing the torch to Sara Jo. We're going to still need some special ed advocates out there.
And until we dismantle the system that is oppressing our students, I hear the term special ed, and I posted something on my Facebook after I was at a lecture, at a shared lecture between a few universities, and I'm not interested in working in special ed. I'm interested in burning it down, because it is not working. We can't dismantle a system that systematically segregates students and say that we could ever fix it. We can't. IDEA, Dr. Cheryl Jorgensen just wrote an amazing piece on IDEA is flawed. LRE is flawed. I hope we look in, hopefully 5, 10, 15 years, we look back at the same way we look back at how we threw away folks in institutions. But I would add, there are over 1 million US citizens still living in institutions today in 2021. It's still happening. And, I would say life skill classes, segregated classes, they're the new institutions.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's the problem is we've been trying to, do that bandage approach. But when the system is built on that medical model, that is something, is wrong with our children, and that they need to be fixed and they have to earn the privilege of being in community. So yeah, that whole it's not a system that can be fixed. Like you said, it has to be dismantled. We have that silo of general ed and we have that silo of special ed, and that's got to disappear. So Olivia, should we expect that there'll be a sequel to Forget Me Not?
A lot of people have been asking, and it's Forget Me Not was really a film that happened while I was trying to make another movie. It hadn't intended to put so much of our own family life in the film. It was always going to be there, but I set out to make a film about inclusive education, and I quite frankly thought that Emilia would be included, so there wasn't much story there. And what happened along the way kind of changed the course of the film, and very quickly my life became the movie and the movie became my life. And, so for me, the film hasn't stopped. I'm living in the sequel, I guess. But, to answer that question, there has been a lot of interest. So it's something that we're exploring.
And it's only the beginning of his school life. So, I'm sure that this is not our only battle. I'm sure that a lot is going to come in the next 12, 13 years. And we are grateful that we found someone like Sara Jo to guide us on this path.
Yes.
It's very valuable for us that we're lucky that we have found this support system in community, and that we have met other parents that are doing the walk.
And for me, I think my goal is, especially with this film and any subsequent film we would do, is to really get this subject matter out of just the community, the disabilities community, and into the mainstream, because one of the biggest reactions I get from people watching the film that don't have someone with a disability in their life is they just say, I had no idea. I thought inclusion was just when they ate lunch together. So how can we have a substantive conversation about including children if people don't even know that it's an issue? So I think, the first step for me and what I'd like to continue doing is to just start that conversation.
And that's why at the end of the film, I love what you added, Olivier, call your school. What is their plan for you? Say you want your student in an inclusive setting, whether they have a disability or not. Because like you said, it's not a disability issue. It's a civil rights, human rights issue.
Oh, totally.
I would add, Hilda, that we have college. We're going to get him.
I know. I was going to say, the other thing is start a college fund, because you never know. And I had the bias that Dylan wouldn't go to college, and so we were saving for our other two kids. And then when Dylan wanted to go to college, it was like, shoot, I should have set up that college account for him. So yeah, there are so many more opportunities now, and it gives us hope, right? That more systemic change is happening, and as more parents get involved, speak out, go to school board meetings, look at this as you're a marketer for inclusion, and what is your marketing plan going to be? Different audiences need different messages. When you talk to the school board members, they need a different message than when you talk to general ed teachers. So there's so many things that we can be doing. And I know most of our viewers personally, so I know all these ladies are out there fighting. Melanie said, it's been hard finding a place in district that want to change and have the right support. And it is. And she is in Westchester. So she totally gets that, right? Tatum, I know, is in Seattle, Washington, and she has been advocating very strongly for her daughter to be included and was just in kindergarten last year. And I think the other thing that we recognize is sometimes our kids can be placed in general ed classrooms, but that's just the start. We have to make sure they're actually actively participating and learning in the general ed classroom versus just having a desk there. So yes, we know there are so many other things that we're going to need to be working on, right?
And I would add, because I sometimes hear this argument of, well, they're just going to be placed in and nothing's going to happen, which is where, that is kind of step 2, right, of how we get engagement. But I would argue, I would rather throw a student in to gen ed with the worst supports than have them in the best segregated setting. So I do want to put that caveat out there that yes, that is step 2, but the worst inclusion is still better than the best segregation.
Well, yeah. I mean, how can what message do we send to our own kids and other kids in the school when they're segregated? And Olivier, like you had said at the beginning of the conversation about when you went to school, there weren't disabled kids that you saw and that you were able to talk with and get to know. And so, yeah, that still has to happen, right? Is that connection with other people. So let me see. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Lisa says at this time, college is still very expensive for folks with intellectual disability. A lot of work needs to be done in this arena too. And it is. Dylan graduated from high school in 2007, and it was before there was any formal program at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. But he was able to audit classes, which isn't as good as now with Think College and more programs supporting students. But yes, there's usually an extra fee, an extra charge for your student to be able to get some supports on campus. So when you look at tuition and room and board and then also extra support, that again becomes, for so many families, it's that white privilege of which kids are going to be able to have that college experience. So there's so many ways that we see that, interconnection between privilege in our society and the work that we still have to do. So I don't know. Yeah, Lisa's daughter just graduated from high school. Because of her inclusive high school team, she has had some incredible growth and achievement as a result. Inclusion is the way to go. And Michelle is with us, and she said, our children deserve the population of the rest of the students in order to keep them safe. La Vista, Nebraska, Ryan Larson walked right out of the school and nobody noticed. He's still missing. So yeah, and I think that's one of the myths that some parents get told, is that your child will be safer in the self-contained special education room. And what we know is that is not true. When your child is included, that's when he has the friends. Those kids go home and talk to their parents about what school was like. They can be kind of the eyes and the ears there for you. And so a safer environment is going to be where your child deserves to be, and that's in the general ed classroom. And Sara Jo, I'm sure you have more to add for that too.
Always. I could speak about this till, kingdom come. But I wanted to put, Michelle had a great on her Facebook page about, I support the Keeping All Students Safe Act, and that's something I wanted, to bring up, that the Keeping All Students Safe Act has been reintroduced. And I bring this up because there's a fundamental notion in our education system that we do not treat disabled kids as humans. And to me, that is what is at the root of all of this. We see an otherness, a less human piece of this, how we treat disabled children. Restraint and seclusion is still a huge issue. There is a disproportionate amount of students with disabilities, Black and brown students, particularly black and brown boys, who are secluded, who are restrained, and students die from this. And we would never do this to someone who we truly saw as human, right? And we see this in all, really a lot of arenas in society. But it comes down to, it is not simply that our students need to be there. We have these practices. What are your school's policies on restraint and seclusion? What are you doing for culturally sustaining practices? What are we doing to seriously see disabled students as humans, right? Because I think when we would look at Willowbrook, we would look at other institutions and say, we weren't treating those folks like they were actually human, and we're still doing that today.
And I think to add to that, just, once the institutional era kind of passed, we saw life expectancy of people with Down syndrome skyrocket, and I think just that alone, if that's not evidence enough that if you treat people with dignity and you don't disenfranchise them from the start, they will lead more full lives and have the opportunity to explore their full potential.
Also, to expand on what Sara Jo and Charmaine brought out, the stigma of the special class is scarring for teenagers in particular. When they come into these classrooms, sometimes they, for the most part, they know they are being singled out. And they are ashamed of being singled out. And sometimes, unfortunately, they start living up to the stereotype. It's like, oh, because I'm in a special ed class, so I can behave like this. I can, develop a counterproductive attitude because I am different. And, this leads to an array of different outcomes that we don't want. I've seen instances where some of the students that are in these classes, they start cutting and then often they disappear. That's why I think the push for mainstreaming is imperative, because we know that they feel stigmatized. They know that they don't want to be in these classes. And, we need to find a way to bring them back into our wing, under our wing, and make them feel that school is an option and that it's a safe place for them.
And I think we're in a really unique time to where we can really get parents of typically developing children behind this as well, because for the past year, they all had their children staying at home and were completely secluded. And most parents that I speak to saw the negative effects of that, depression, social regression. And that's the same thing that happens in a segregated class, especially a secluded setting. So I think now's the time that, for this film to come out, it's going to be fresh on everyone's mind. And I think we can get our friends behind this.
Well, and I think too, the other, kind of bright spot with virtual learning this year was parents got to see exactly what kinds of, curriculum that their child was involved in. And they got to see, did the general ed teacher make sure that your child also got the invite for the Zoom meeting, or were they kind of forgotten about? And I'm a firm believer that we have to widen our circle of allies. because when we are just parents of disabled children, we are easily dismissed as a special interest group. And when we widen this and see it as a social justice issue, and that there are so many marginalized students in our classes, and we gather the other allies, the other parents in our building, and this becomes a school-wide concern and change that people want to make. So I just, and one other soapbox moment I'll have is I really encourage parents not to make separate special ed committees, PTAs. You are just continuing that separate system. So join your local PTO, PTA. You can infuse, inclusive ideas while you're serving on that committee that reaches out to the whole school, instead of coming from, this is my cause because my child is disabled. So that's one of my pet peeves.
And also just spending that energy and explaining to parents of typically developing children what the benefits are for their own child to be in an inclusive setting. I'm reminded, Sue Swen, that's in the film, her child was segregated and she wanted him to be included. So what she did is she went around the school district and just basically explained the benefits of inclusion to everybody. And before you knew it, they had to dismantle all the segregated settings because everyone was calling to have their children included, both typically developing and children with challenges. So I think, to me, that's a story that, a grassroots effort can really make a difference.
Oh, exactly.
Absolutely. And if I can get on, one of my many soapboxes for a moment, that, when we're talking about, yes, allies beyond the disability community, but we can't speak about inclusive education if we're not also advocating for trans kids, if we're not also advocating for English language learners, if we're also not advocating for undocumented students. We have a horrible segregation problem in the disability community, but we cannot move forward and throw all these other students to the side. When I go into schools and do professional development, I'm like, I know you hired me to talk about, inclusive ed for students with intellectual disabilities, but let me also tell you about, how we're going to update your bathroom policy to be trans inclusive, how we're going to ensure that students' preferred pronouns and names are being used, because it's not just about including, folks with disabilities. It is about creating a society that is accepting of us all.
It's really a philosophy, I think.
And I think language matters, right? Like, you'll hear me say, I don't say special class, I don't say self-contained, I say segregated, because that's what it is. There's nothing special about, you can't sugarcoat it. You can't put enough glitter on it to make it the right placement. I can only call segregation so many things. It's still segregation.
Right. Oh, exactly. And let me take a couple other comments we have from people. So Amy is here with us, and Amy said, a great blunder that educators and parents fall prey to when we talk about student strengths. We need to be super careful that strengths aren't used to earn general ed, but truly utilized for teaching and developing well-rounded, self-determined humans. I love that, Amy. And that's, and Lisa loves it. And that's the thing. I was just, recently working with a family that has a little boy that just had a year ago some traumatic brain injury, and he is relearning everything, but he's doing so well. And part of me, when I hear myself talking at meetings, and I'll say, but he can do what the other kindergartners are doing. It's it's fine. He's going to just fit in perfectly. And so then part of me is like, yeah, but that is setting people up to say, we have to be so close to what the other kids in the classroom are doing. And that's how we convince you to include our kid. And it's like, no, no matter what his needs are, no matter what level you're seeing for his performance, this is his school, this is his grade, this is where he's going to be. So it is, we have to be so careful with our language, right? It does make a huge difference. So Maggie says, another barrier issue I see is that many teachers and school administrators think that when we as parents push for inclusion, we are only looking for social benefits. But we also need to emphasize that the inclusion needs meaningful academically. This likely means the general ed teachers will have to adapt how they teach and how they assess students. So yes, I know, like, I just really look at the framework of universal design for learning as if we could get teachers trained and using that with fidelity, so much can change in our classrooms. And Sara Jo or Olivia or Hilda, I don't know, if you want to comment on some of these responses from our viewers.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like it's said in the film with I think she's the director of lower school at Henderson, that these are just what good educators do. The only difference is that we somehow have put this like special label on some kids and think they need something totally different. But no, we need to just educate them the way we do anyone else, using good teaching strategies that we know support all students.
Yeah, and also it's also something that the gen ed teachers need to get on board with. They need to be willing to embrace the idea of inclusion, and the admins need to start providing the supports for that, because part of the issue here is that gen ed teachers, they are afraid of changing the way they have been doing things for so many years. So, they should be also getting the preparation to that teachers that teach students with disabilities are getting to implement UDL, differentiated instruction, and all these tools that are available, but they have been particularly set for people with particular licenses. So, it's a change in philosophy. We need to get them on board, and we need to start preparing them for to cater to every type of student, not only children that might seem that don't have any particular needs, to the ones that can speak, to the ones that have intellectual disabilities. It's a matter of rethinking the way we're doing things.
And I think that it comes down to rethinking the way we do teacher preparation, right? I was lucky enough in my teacher preparation to be duly certified. I hate that we have two different certifications, but let's pretend that's the next step forward. And why isn't everybody duly certified?
Right. Yeah.
I know, and I graduated from college in the 70s, and I was duly certified. So it's like, I don't know how we got away from that, but I know that teacher prep is like so important, because that's the next generation of teachers, right?
One thing that was great to see at the, both at the Henderson School, where they, after school, they're just problem solving. They're all meeting in small groups in the hallway, and they're talking about specific students, like, oh, John did this today, what can we do? And they're working it out, and it's just amazing to see. And then the other, to what you were saying, when we visited the College of New Jersey, that has an inclusive program for people with disabilities, they're teaching the next generation of teachers, and they're learning about inclusion alongside people with disabilities. And I think that's so important to kind of break down those barriers.
And I would encourage folks to look at, your local universities that have pre-service teaching programs, because presuming competence is not a shared philosophy in the field of teacher preparation. We have universities that still teach that presuming competence is dangerous. And that, to someone like me, is so astronomically off base. So look, when we see folks, there are university professors who are teaching things like this student has to show you on a standardized measure. Part of the problem is we're reifying these notions within teacher prep. So look at what their syllabuses are. Look at, are they reading Doug Bicklin? Are they reading Julie Costa? Are they reading Christy Ashby? These kind of key names in inclusive education. And if not, that's also another place to start advocating. Why aren't you teaching presuming competence to your pre-service teachers?
Oh, exactly. And I want to remember, Sara Jo, for people, if they want to connect with you. So there's the documentary, and then here's Sara Jo's email. And so that would be a way that you could connect. I don't know, Sara Jo, since you're doing your PhD now, if you're still advocating for families, if somebody wants to connect with you for that.
Yep. Certainly happy to connect.
Oh, good. And let me see if we have any other comments or questions here to share. So differing abilities are a natural part of the human experience. All students need to be valued for the strengths they have and given the supports and services based on their individual needs to unlock their potential. Rich diversity in the makeup of the classroom is such an enriched environment for all the students. Yes, so well said. And Natalie is a special ed teacher in Idaho. And yes, Natalie, we're recording it, so it will be available on just here on the Facebook page, and I'll also put it a few other places. But, as soon as we're done with the live show, people can catch the replay here. And let me see. Amy says, no sleep when there's work to be done. Exactly, right? And so maybe as a way that we can close, Olivier and Hilda, if you can talk about some of the suggested action steps that you give at the end of the documentary, Forget Me Not, so our viewers can hear those ideas.
Yeah, I think one of the main things is to first share the film with all your friends. I think so many people don't even know that this is a topic. And to be fair, before my son was born, I didn't know either. We need to educate ourselves as adults to kind of dismantle this system that we've created. So I think, sharing the film is a great first step. But once you see the film, I think a great second step would be to call your school and ask how your child can be included, whether they have a disability or not. I think, it's everybody benefits from inclusive education. And, we show the evidence in the film. So I think those are my two main things is, to share the film with your friends and have a conversation about it. It's okay to disagree with it, and it's okay if it's just so new that it takes a while sometimes to absorb. But, and then the second thing is to just call your school up and see how you can get more inclusive settings.
Yes. So Hilda, what would you say because I know we have quite a few people that are also, either a therapist or a special education teacher that also have children that are getting supports and services. So Hilda, would you have a tip or two for parents and just what they're going through as they advocate?
At the beginning of this process, I was feeling very lost and very lonely. I just thought like the only person I could share this was Olivier, but that's not the case. once I realized that there were other families that were battling the same situation, I decided to find support. And support from other parents, support from organizations, and there's nonprofits that are doing the work. So I feel like that notion that you're alone on this battle, it doesn't have to be like that. So go out there, try to find support, try to find an advocate if you think that will benefit you on your quest for inclusion, and try to lean on those that have done the walk, because there's a lot to learn from other people, and hopefully it's something that you as a parent can achieve.
Oh, exactly. Thank you. And Sara Jo, from the education point of view, the advocacy point of view, what would be some action steps that you would like to see parents become involved with?
Now, I think very similarly to with parents is finding your community. I get calls and texts all the time from inclusive educators who are like, I feel like I'm in this alone, and sometimes it feels that way. Finding your community, finding your support, and I say whether you need an advocate or just your neighbor or friend with you, bring someone to the IEP meeting. You want to set the precedent that I'm going to bring someone with me. So if you do have to, level up to someone else, it's not such a shock. But also that these are very emotional things. And sometimes it's nice just to have a second set of ears that are slightly, at least a baby step detached. Say, this is what I heard. How did you hear it? And I would say, again, looking at the research, you'll hear me as a scholar and a researcher. I love the research. There's only research to support inclusion. You want the research, email me. I will send you Dropboxes full of it. Let's start there and remember, it's not if this works. I want us to take the word if and throw it out of our mind. It is how we get this to work.
Oh, exactly. Well, I so appreciate all three of you carving out your time. I know this is a busy season for everyone, and but the film Forget Me Not, and I want to bring up back up the URL for that, is such a powerful film, and you will be able to continue to see that in the coming months. And so you can always check back at the website here and you'll get updated information. So Hilda and Olivier, Sara Jo, thank you so much. It was fun to spend some time with the three of you, and we know there's a lot of work that we have to continue to do. But we also know that it's possible. And if it's possible for one student in one little schoolhouse, it's possible for your child too. So thank you again for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And we shall see everyone. Keep your eyes peeled. There'll be some other surprise guests that we have this summer. So I am Charmaine Tanner, and I appreciate you and the work that you do as you continue to advocate so your child is safe, happy, and learning beside their friends every day at school. So until next time, you guys take care.